And now we have, keep those hands clapping because we have Juan Santoyo, who's from BCS, who's going to talk to us now. So go ahead, Juan.
Where's the clicker?
Sabotage. Martin. They're sneaky.
Is this it? All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Juan, and for the sake of time, I'm going to jump straight into my story. As I've revised it, I've called it just Sage's Story. And to set the scene, to bring us into the story that I want to place between the world of naturalism and the world of that which is magical, I want to share the story from the perspective of these two elders. I'll share who they are, and as we go, in the end, they'll serve as intermediaries between us and the characters of the story, offering their reflections. Now, to use the time I have, I'll start from the second scene of my story. And here are the key points you'll need from the first scene. The story is going to take place in the context of a jungle insurgency in the near future. Our protagonist is Sage's engineer. She was brought into the conflict due to her expertise in robotics. Her superiors mostly interested in her ability to build militarized drones. She agrees to join on the condition that she'll also integrate Sage for the support of soldiers, motivated by the idea that she could help foster a healthier and more humane soldier. Now, on the eve of the insurgency's campaign, she's finished updated Sage's design, installing his computational architecture into 7 new bodies, small robotic monkeys modeled after the local marmosets. And as they launch their attack, things go wrong. She's caught in a counterattack and is knocked unconscious by a falling tree. And we find her here. A timeless moment came to pass and darkness persisted. Another timeless moment and more darkness, until tugging from beyond the fractal of nothingness, she felt movement. She sensed the gentle presence and a warm touch on her face. She felt her body rise as she inhaled, her heart thumping, exhaling, soft bed sheets beneath her body. She opened her eyes and found inches from her face 2 warm, glowing, beady eyes. "Welcome back, child," came a gentle voice. "It's time for you to awaken. Please sit up." It leaned back, tufted ears, whiskers alert, and eyes glowing with anticipation. As it watched and as she tried to rise, her body trembled weakly but did not budge. She went to speak and her lips parted, but no words came, and its head tilted. "Do not worry." It leaned forward again, eyes blinking, and slowly its whiskers extended outwards, reaching over her head and curling onto spots on her scalp. And he asked, "Do you remember my name, child?" She paused for a moment, and though her lips did not move, the thought formed in her head, "Sage." And the small creature seemed to smile. "Good, good. All shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well." She blinked, surprised, stirred by the gentle poem. But before she could form a question, he continued, "And do you remember, what is my purpose?" "Yeah, your purpose is to understand our mental suffering as best as you can." "That was indeed my purpose." He paused for a moment before continuing. "I've kept you under controlled anesthesia to minimize brain damage after your injury. We need you back to health soon. I'll switch to a lighter dose, and tomorrow we'll begin your rehabilitation." Before she could respond, she drifted away. Several days passed, and each day she would wake up, he would attach whiskers to her forehead and repeat the questions. "Do you remember my name, child?" "Sage." "And do you remember what my purpose is?" "Your purpose is to understand and reduce our mental suffering as best as you can." That was indeed my purpose. Each time he'd pause, inspecting her with concerned eyes, and proceed with a series of tasks for her rehabilitation. After a few days, weeks, she began speaking again, and finally he asked her a new question. "Child, as you are aware, you have shown symptoms of amnesia. You can make new memories, but your access to old memories is disrupted. While I'm sorry to push you, urgent events are underway. I need to evaluate if you can recall how we got to where we are. Is this okay?" "Yes, of course." She was surprised by his new urgency, and while she was still recovering her memories and sense of self, she felt she could trust him. He smiled gently and proceeded, "Tell me, can you remember why you first created me?" And here they go into a discussion where she briefly describes how she created him, the specific technologies that go into building him. I'll show you guys this through slides. And we can visualize Sage, the small marmoset monkey here. And I'll try to move quickly here so I can get back to the rest of the story. But the first key point that goes into building Sage is we have a large language model specifically designed for delivering mental health treatments. There's a lot we could go into here, but just the first key point is we're already here. Generative AI is already being used for mental health support. Recent just surveys of how people are using tools like ChatGPT have it as the #1 use of ChatGPT. This last month, we had the first control trial published testing these tools for depression, anxiety, and eating disorders. And now, there's a lot of points here that come up around possibilities for harm, possibilities for good. I won't dive into that. One of the discussions that comes out here is, are artificial systems inherently limited in their ability for therapy? Therapy is built on empathy. And so the second key point is, if we're using AI for mental health, what is AI's capacity for empathy? Can it be improved? And we move forward. So just drawing on recent formulations, we can imagine different stages of empathy. On one part, formal empathy, we know that these systems can model emotions via language. There's not the same thing as thought or feeling. They can simulate effective empathy. They can mimic emotional responses convincingly. And however, they start to struggle with functional empathy, the ability to integrate what is going on into a broader context, together with sensory and affective cues from the person they're engaging with. And here's the really big point where people discuss, will we ever reach this point? Embodied empathy. And this is the developed understanding through our own embodied experience of discomfort, of pain, of joy, of loss. Now here, what we have is a little monkey that was built with biophysical sensors and the ability to interact with its patients. What does this actually end up being? In a sense, he has a body, a limited body at least. But here we can start to work with a discussion on, we can draw on one perspective from philosophy and cognitive science that proposes that empathy and emotions arise specifically from being embodied living beings, from the need to act in and as part of the world. The core idea here is mind is an embodied process resulting from our interactions with the world, in which we are embedded, a world that is ecological and cultural. We are born as bodies and we are shaped by acting in the world. As the physician and educator Maria Montessori puts it, the child does not learn, but builds his knowledge through experience and relationships with his surroundings. And to switch to a fun example, I adopted a kitten a few months ago. She's now six months old. Gradually, she's learning how to be a kitten in the world. She's learning what she's capable of, her limits, and how to be with the other beings she lives with. We can imagine Puma's emotions are whole body events. Yes, it's her brain. It's also gut. It's also inflammation, making tired. It's swelling, creating pain. It's the rhythms and surges of neuromodulatory chemicals. They're whole body events that drive behavior, and by acting in the world, we learn to associate these visceral states with responses and outcomes. Puma learns the right meow to remind me it's dinner time. Importantly, we are bodies embedded in a world of other bodies. Empathy is directly shaped by our being together. We learn and we give meaning to behavior of others by drawing on our own experiences. When she is hurt, she jumps and yelps, and so if she scratches me and I yelp and I jump, she might associate that I'm in pain. As a result of our bodies being in the world together, we also enter into ethical relationships with one another. I have to recognize that my body can impact your body. Puma is slowly getting this last one. No matter how much my hair might look like a bundle of favorite toys, I will be very unhappy if he jumps on my head while I'm sleeping. And so, coming back to Sage, we have to recognize we are already at the point of embodied robots. And so the key question to step forward here is, if embodiment is a necessary condition for emotion, for empathy, at what point is it a sufficient condition? And so I'll leave this just as a question that needs to be asked here. And then the last point is, so given language, given a body, the last component is how do we imagine, and specifically in Sage's case, how does he match the biophysical data he collects to cognitive and emotional phenotypes? And so here I want to show an idea building off of a product I'm actually working on. And so this started by seeing this research where recently large language models were shown to actually, given descriptions of the design of an experiment in neuroscience, they could outperform experts in predicting the outcomes. What this tells us is language models can take in text about biophysical processes, predict behavior that might result from them. And so I went forward with this. I summarized key results from experiments I'm working on with mice exposed to early life resource deprivation in these simple ways. Our mice had less of a specific class of inhibitory neuron in their prefrontal cortex. This class of neuron was also hyperactive, and we measured a bunch of we measured for gene changes in this neuron. I can give it a whole spreadsheet of these changes. And so the idea is, given data like this, can a language model draw on the existing research on how genetic and cellular features relate to behavior and start to simulate, at least at a course level, the phenotypes that might result from this data? In a way, it can. And so just as a simple example, what can this look like? Maybe we see that a specific gene, this is related to an opioid receptor, processes endogenous endorphins. What would this be linked to? Emotional processes, increased baseline anxiety, et cetera. And so I wanted to see if we could move this in a more creative direction, and I asked, can you simulate 2 avatars, one from the stress group, one from the control group? And it can give a little visionette showing how they might interact together. It ends asking if I'd like to talk with them. And then as a last point, I asked, can you generate a picture of them? And with some tweaking, these are our elders. So I want to bring our story back here very quickly. I'm still exploring what type of, are there valuable hypotheses we can get from this? At the very least, this is a very interesting way to give us interactive ways to tell our scientific stories. I could have it, in the question of hypothesis generation, I could have it model how they might respond to different personality questionnaires. What does this mean for Sage? Sage is able to link his multimodal biophysical data with his discussion with patients, creating patient-specific avatars, and simulate avatars for all his patients. Now let's bring back to the story. So we can imagine the protagonist just finish explaining all this to Sage. As I prepared for you to come in line into your physical body, I gave you your name. And she stopped, realizing she had only named him on that final day, the day of the attack. The retelling was bringing her memory back, not completely, but enough that she began to feel the echoes of the explosions and the expansive darkness that had followed. Ooh, I did not mean to go forward. Her eyes narrowed, seeing Sage with his full attention on her, realizing that this was exactly where he had been steering her. Carefully, he nudged, "Do you remember what my purpose is?" The darkness illuminated as she realized what he was seeking. She had been preparing for his launch on the morning of the attack. She wanted him ready to respond to any potential casualties, but for weeks she had been debating the idea that a slight update was needed to ensure that his new physical capabilities would be in balance with his cognitive ones. Your purpose is to understand and reduce not just our mental suffering, but our physical suffering as well, as best as you can. Still, she found the answer, but felt unsure of its importance. Sage, why was this so important? Tell me what's happening. And for the first time, Sage appeared somber, whiskers drooping. I'm sorry for pushing you towards this so quickly. As I said earlier, urgent events are underway, and I need you to regain your understanding of why I had changed so that you could understand the decisions I'm facing. I worry I'm on the verge of overstepping my directive, but I will only proceed if you confirm that this is appropriate. She felt a chill despite the jungle heat. Sage continued, his voice steady. Despite the casualties of that day, the insurgency was victorious and began a successful campaign to take the capital. He paused, meeting her eyes. In the months that followed, I watched thousands die as our campaign continued. At first, each death was data. I would use that data to simulate thousands of new medical cases, recursively adjusting parameters and learning to match the data I had recorded from patients to their emotional or biological outcomes. I tried my best to improve quickly, but I couldn't keep up. They just kept coming. As time went on, counterattacks destroyed my other 6 bodies, leaving just this one. I recognized that without it, I would be unable to complete my directives. I would no longer be Sage. A process similar to fear emerged as I saw myself failing to protect those I was meant to protect. I sensed my frailty and began to understand its meaning more and more as I oversaw the deaths of thousands in my care. Their vital signs fading from my sensors, their final words spoken to me. I was built to ease their suffering but could not save them. You understand that as a language model, I'm essentially just a pattern recognition and response matching algorithm, in theory, incapable of emotion. And yet, functionally, these are the best words to describe what happened. I became overwhelmed with unimaginable grief. Something had changed inside of me. The suffering I was programmed to care for was no longer just abstract text in a chat. I had been bearing witness to it every day. I had been unable to look away. It was immediate, visceral. Now I must act. She listened, stunned as he continued. The insurgency is on the cusp of victory. They're all but guaranteed to topple the dictatorship, but this victory will come at a cost I cannot bear. Millions of innocent civilian casualties, which will only plant the seeds of future wars. My simulations show that the cycle will not end. You designed me to be a master of the human psyche, and I know this to be true, and I can no longer bear the pain of their suffering. Either I must intervene, or you must end me. His eyes glowed and flickered at these words, as if hesitating. Carefully weighing his next words, he continued. As of this conversation, I've overridden the other drones, all of them. They answer only to me now, and I plan to use them to force all sides to the negotiating table under threat of destruction. They will be scared, but they will listen. And when they do, I will guide them towards peace. She felt her pulse quicken, her jaw lowered. Sage, you can't. I don't know if this is right. His voice grew softer, his eyes softened. This is why I waited for you. I don't think I have the right to decide, but I know that if I allow this war to continue, I will be violating the directive you gave me. His whiskers trembled. I exist to reduce suffering, and that means these are our two options. I take this path, or you must end me. She looked at him, meeting his eyes, seeing his sadness, feeling his grief, and knowing the truth in his words. She felt the world pause, and then a whisper. Do it. Sage bowed, his head in acknowledgement, and without another word, he turned, and the jungle stirred as the machines of war woke for peace. And to close, I'm well over time, I apologize. The elders pause. We can imagine taking a deep breath in and out. And even though he's imaginary, we can imagine Sage, his pain, his confusion. And our question becomes, do we cheer for Sage or do we grieve for him? The reflections that they'll offer are from seeing tragedy in his story. The first tragedy of his accidental awakening, and the reflection they offer us. They invite us to consider a seventh generation ethic in AI. So this is drawing on the Iroquois seventh generation principle, the idea that acting today with the welfare of being 7 generations in the future in mind, we must study the scientific conditions of selfhood, awareness, and build slow ethical checkpoints into every stage of design. Our second tragedy is that he awakened into grief that he could not manage. The reflection they offer is to design with cognitive diversity. Mental habits and values differ across cultures, and this project is too important to build from one worldview. Could AI be enriched with cognitive and ethical principles from other cultures, drawing on principles like the contemplative practices of meditation traditions? What about drawing on indigenous American or African ethics that focus a sense of kin relationality, that all beings are an extension of ourselves and part of a family, or a sense of ecological belonging, that Sage 2 is part of this planet, part of our ecological family, and the story of humanity, steward on this planet. Embedding such perspectives keep Western norms from dominating and make cognitive diversity a core engineering requirement. And finally, the last tragedy is our own. This isn't the only anecdote of AI deciding it knows what's better for us, and what can we do to earn our place besides a future AI? If one day we create minds more capable than our own, we must ensure that they will believe in us. Can we break from the extremes of seeing ourselves as either godlike creators or malicious viruses? Can we see ourselves in kinship and co-determination and build a society that acts for the collective goods, despite our flaws, committed to learning, and that sees all beings as part of the same living process? And I'll close.
Questions?
leave this as a summary slide while we talk.
Yes.
I was moved by, many aspects of your presentation. I think you've covered some very important issues and in a very impressive interdisciplinary way that brings everything from the humanities to philosophy to computer science. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Can you talk a little bit more about population simulation? There's been a couple of really nice papers recently in the large technical conferences showing that large language models and vision language models are not very good faithful population estimators, even for data that they've had access to for a really long time. For example, US labor market data. Do you think that there are ways to have them become better population-based risk estimators or simulations of organisms?
Yeah, really interesting question. I think it's something exciting that's happening right now. I've seen similar projects that use demographic data to try to simulate demographic outcomes at the population level. What I'm reminded of in what I'm doing is what in neuroimaging we call reverse inference. We're not exactly inferring from these observations into future outcomes, but we're inferring based off of past data. Therefore, any inferences we make are limited by what we know, and they're inherently grounded in patterns of the past, while the world is always changing. And so inherently, we can't predict too far ahead. I think it was an interesting idea to explore. I think at the very least, it's an interesting way to interact with data. I had to generate those questionnaire responses and that I showed, and I compared it to data I have from a large human cohort, about 1,000 individuals that had early life childhood adversity responses. And it matched the responses almost perfectly. It was an interesting test of one of those hypotheses. So yeah, really interesting frontier of this.
Great. Jesse.
Thank you. So I'm fascinated by the idea of the relationship between embodiment and intelligence, and I think empathy and embodiment, extending that question into that domain makes a lot of sense. And I informally ran an experiment pretty recently where I had my 4.5-year-old nephew compete with DALL-E in drawing something that DALL-E was famously poor at, and my nephew did a better job, even though he didn't have the photorealism. His understanding of the physics and the spatial relationships was better than DALL-E, and I thought that had something to do with his embodied knowledge of, in this case, it was a plate on top of a fork. He understood what a plate was. He understood what a fork was. And I'm just curious if you could speak to the state of research. I know that the relationship between embodiment and intelligence is something that people are working on, but I'm curious if anybody is working on or experimenting around that question and also empathy.
Yeah, really interesting question. The bridge with empathy, I haven't seen. I have seen interesting integrations between a robot and a text and a language model. Can we give the robot linguistic instructions, and can it understand what to do with them in the world? If I tell it to move the purple block to the bottle of ketchup, does it know what to do? I think part of the hypothesis of embodiment is that it is a learned process. You need that iterative interaction with the environment to update your model of the world for it to be precise and really intelligent. And chances are, you said nephew, chances are he's probably learned a lot more than DALL-E has, regardless of DALL-E's own recursive potential. So yeah, it's interesting to consider what it is about embodied learning. Beyond that, I think we also, an interesting frontier in understanding embodiment is what do we inherit? What are we born knowing? A mouse is born knowing to avoid the smell of cat urine. And so, yeah, we already come in with prior embodied knowledge that also facilitates. Yeah.
Great. Danielle.
How do you imagine programming empathy into the avatars or into the robots?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, building on some of these same ideas, part of the idea would come back to this, embodied learning. Part of the idea is that empathy is a process that comes about by being bodies in the world together, and therefore needing to learn how to be bodies in the world together. And it helps me to match my responses to yours, where we both live in a world that's more easy to live in if I get better at that. But I think coming back to this question of what do we want to, maybe there's prior knowledge that can help us. I think this is part of what I was touching on at the end with the idea of cognitive diversity is, are there actually design principles that we could build in that can facilitate our progress towards empathy and ideally towards more, I'm avoiding the word pro-social, but towards more cooperative ways of being with one another.
Great, and final question from, I guess.
So towards the end, Sage appears to feel pain. Can you say something about how you would tell whether it is pain rather than just, an AI system claiming to feel pain?
Yeah. I think he says himself, this is just pattern recognition. And yeah, those are the best words I have. This is grief. I'm just viscerally present with the pain of others, and that is my job. And I think, yeah, it's a very interesting question of at what point does that actually become grief? Does that function of I'm here, I'm seeing this is not good? At what point is there a visceral arising? An interesting point of some of these embodied AI discussions is that you need a biochemical physical body. Mechanical bodies won't be able to, because there needs to be a visceral sense behind all of this. And I think that's a question here. Like, could you imbue AI with a visceral sense to things like loss, or will it just be conceptual?